Today is May 27, 2017, and we will be continuing our investigation of the community rule tonight. But of course, before we begin, let's ask our Heavenly Family to guide us into all truth. Heavenly Family, thank you so very much for another opportunity to come together and to consider the principles of knowledge and righteousness and truth. Please draw us together into unity upon the eternal platform of truth. Help us to go beyond the type of thinking that we've had our whole lives. Help us to be rid of unreason and to accept reason and truth as it is. Please help us to be transformed by knowledge of the truth and to come to a correct understanding of exactly what the nature of the community rule is. Thank you so much. Please help us, guide us to bring this discussion to be the very best thing it can be. Toda, thank you. We ask this b'Shem Tzemach, in the name of Branch. Amen. So, as usual, for our community rule studies, we'll divide our time here into 3 sections. And, of course, sometimes the first section or second section take longer, and so we don't end up getting to the third, which is all right for that to happen from time to time. But the first thing that we're going to do is talk about what the community rule is, why it is important, and our methods of investigating it. And then we'll get into comments and questions broadly related to the community rule. And from there, we will go into a line-by-line investigation of the text. And so we'll, of course, start with the first elements. What is the community rule? Why is it important? And our methods of study. So as most and probably all here on the call are aware, the community rule is one of the most important Dead Sea Scrolls. It is a text which was written in the early part of the 2nd century BCE, so, about 200 years before the time of Jesus, and it represents a community of Jews recognized by most scholars as being Essene Jews, which was one of the many sects of Judaism at that time. And the community rule itself does not use the word Essenes, but the practices and beliefs, greatly correspond between the community rule and other Dead Sea Scrolls when compared alongside of the writings of Josephus, Philo, and Pliny concerning the Essenes, to the point where pretty much you'd have to say, yeah, this is talking about the same group of people. And, the community rule, in describing this group of Jews and their beliefs and practices, has several elements within it that really show its importance. This group of Jews was not like every other group of Jews. Some groups of Jews were messianic in nature and had, a prophetic type leader, but, not all groups of Jews were like that. Many, if not most Jews in the time of Jesus and for a decent while before, believed that the time of prophecy was over. So they were not expecting more prophets or more revelations of truth. But the group of Jews represented by the community rule was different. They had a leader who they considered to be a messenger and a prophet, and they referred to this leader as the teacher of righteousness or the righteous teacher. And we consider that individual to be greatly important not only because he was clearly a brilliant mind, but also because he was considered to be a prophet by very important individuals like John the Baptist, Jesus, James, Paul. And the reason why I mentioned those individuals in particular is because John the Baptist was the leader of his movement. Jesus then became the leader. And after Jesus, James, the brother of Jesus, became the leader of the Nazarene movement. And following that, Paul did. And so these are great leaders in a successive line in the first century. And, that was not the beginning of the line. John the Baptist was not the very beginning. He built his work largely upon the work of this individual, the teacher of righteousness. And, we've gone through this in many previous studies, so I won't explain all the reasons why we can know this to be the case and all of that. But that is one reason why the community rule is so important. So another reason why the community rule is so important, and this is what we discussed last night, or one of the things that we gave a fair amount of attention to, is the fact that it advocates a moral system and a moral remedy, if you will, that is so very different from the moral systems of today. We talked about how there's typical religious morality, which bases morality in divine authority. And then there's secular morality, which bases morality in society and, views it as kind of just merely a social development which is really, not absolute one way or the other. It's not necessarily objective. It's just a code of conduct that develops within a given community. While that is true, in terms of how moral systems actually work, the failure of secular morality is that most versions of it, advocate the idea that that's all morality is, that there is no objective anything. So therefore, you actually have totally contrary moral claims. People are making claims about reality and concerning what is right and what is wrong to do in terms of reality. And, the secular moral system gives no objective standard by which to test those claims, and basically says that, it's all just a social thing, and therefore, ultimately, no one within a secular moral system has justification for really objecting to another moral system in a different society. So that's kind of a problem. But what we discussed is that the only moral system which makes sense is a truth-based moral system, a reality-based moral system, which I won't go into explaining in depth tonight as I did last night, unless there's a particular need. But we found that that's the system that the community rule advocates, and it is the only system that could possibly make sense and be true. And that's the system advocated within the community rule. So this makes it, of course, very important for us, especially since the means of getting rid of immorality in the community rule is the same as we have been given in this message. That is to fill one's mind with truth, casting out error, and thus have one's thinking governed by truth rather than error, thus leading to right action. So anyway, these are the some of the reasons why the community rule is important, and our investigation of the community rule is governed by experimental principles, meaning that rather than reading the text and simply seeing what matches our preconceptions and what does not, and deciding whether we want to keep it or follow it based on its correspondence with our correspondence or lack of correspondence with our preconceptions. Rather than doing that, we are studying it carefully to accurately understand the claims that it puts forward. In other words, we are desperately trying not to misinterpret it. We want to really know what its author or authors had in mind. And then we want to compare that to material reality, and any claim that it makes concerning material reality, we want to put to the test to see whether or not it is true. So this is very, very important for us to do. And that's how we can conduct a proper experiment and thus end up with the correct view of the character of the community rule. I know that it's raining here, and I'm hoping that the sound isn't too bothersome. Hopefully it doesn't really come through that much. But anyway, I guess that's all I'll say for now in terms of what the community rule is, why it's important, and our methods of study. Does anyone have any comments or questions broadly related to the community rule? Okay, well, if there are no comments or questions, do you guys want to get right into the text?
Sounds good to me.
Okay, so we are in 1QS column 4. 1QS, of course, is the best preserved copy of the community rule found among the Dead Sea Scrolls. There were 11 or so copies, and 1QS was the first found and best preserved, having 11 columns. And it's a pretty important manuscript. So we are, let's see the line that we're at. Okay, so we are in 1QS column 4, and let's see, maybe line 23 or so. So I'll give a recap of what this section is talking about. Starting back in column 3, maybe around line 13 or 14, begins a section which is a teaching on the two principles or the two spirits. What it describes is a cosmic dualism which looks at all things in terms of either being true or false. There's the spirit of truth and the spirit of falsehood. And everything really fits into one category or another. And it's quite the profound section. At the beginning of column 4, it describes the manifestations of both spirits in the world. So it talks about truth and how truth is manifested, and it lists a bunch of things, and then it describes what the final outcome will be for all who walk according to truth. After that, it goes into describing all the manifestations of falsehood in the world and the outcome of all who walk according to falsehood. And then it describes the battle between these two principles, the conflict, and how they are at such odds with each other, and how truth abhors the works of falsehood, and falsehood abhors all the ways of truth. And it talks about how the struggle between them is so fierce and they do not walk together. But God has appointed an end for falsehood. And it describes how this end is to come about. And essentially it talks about a purification of people from the ways of falsehood, and how some from the children of men will be purified, refined. And the way that will happen is by receiving the Spirit of truth. So it's really a fascinating passage, and I'll read some of what we've read here in this little section, starting at line 20. And I think I'll just read until the end of the paragraph as it is in the translation by Geza Vermes. So, starting at line 20. God will then purify every deed of man with his truth. He will refine for himself some from the children of humanity by extinguishing falsehood from the depths of their flesh. He will cleanse them of all their deeds of wickedness with the Spirit of holiness, otherwise translated, with the Holy Spirit. Like purifying waters, he will sprinkle upon them the Spirit of truth to cleanse them of all abomination and falsehood. And they will be plunged into the spirit of purification, that they may instruct the upright in the knowledge of the Most High and teach the wisdom of the children of heaven to the perfect of ways. For God has chosen them for an everlasting covenant, and all the glory of Adam shall be theirs. There shall be no more lies, and all the works of falsehood shall be put to shame. So most of what I just read we have already discussed, but I do not believe that we have discussed the last two sentences. We talked about teaching the wisdom of the children of heaven to the perfect of way, but then the next thing that it describes is, for God has chosen them for an everlasting covenant, and all the glory of Adam shall be theirs. So I do not believe we have discussed that. Does anyone have any comments or questions on that sentence, or would anyone like to explain how they understand it?
Yeah, I think it's kind of clear. Basically, God has chosen for us an everlasting covenant that we have an opportunity to experience the glory that Adam had before the fall.
Yeah, amen. Seems pretty simple. And, one of the reasons also why it might seem somewhat, more obvious in its meaning and more understandable to us is because we have actually discussed this before. And, there's a phrase in the Thanksgiving hymns. It's a hymn that's designated as hymn 1 in Geza Vermes's translation, and it's the very end of hymn 1. It says, "Thou wilt cause them to inherit all the glory of Adam and abundance of days." So we've discussed this in our study of that Thanksgiving hymn, and we have a YouTube video. I think it's called Thanksgiving Hymn 1 or something like that. And in that study, we discussed this in some detail. So if anyone wants more understanding on that, you can go back to those studies. We bring out, the prophecies of Micah, like Micah 4:8, which talk about the restoration of the first dominion and so on. And we talk about how Christ gained kingship. He became the second Adam, and he went into the heavenly sanctuary as the representative of this world, whereas prior to the incarnation, he wasn't the representative of this world. He was basically the leader in the heavenly council, along, of course, with the rest of the heavenly family. And all the worlds had their own representatives, the sons of heaven, or the sons of God, if you will. And, in Job, you read about them gathering. And who came to represent the earth? Well, it was the devil. And so the basic idea is that originally Adam and Eve were to represent this world in the heavenly council, but by joining the rebellion under the devil, Satan became the representative of this earth. And, that obviously isn't a good thing. It doesn't really work in favor of our interests at all. And so Christ came as man, as Adam. We are all, quote-unquote, Adam. In Hebrew, the word for mankind is Adam. So it's basically the same thing. And, he came and became the second Adam and gained back that Adamic dominion. And so ever since, he has been the representative of this world in the heavenly council. Now, the thing is, all things are supposed to be restored, and we are supposed to receive that dominion back, and he is supposed to be restored to his rightful place in the heavenly council as being not only the king of this world, but the king of the kings of all the world. So this is a very important and significant event. And this is really what it is, to have all the glory of Adam restored to us. It means for us to be able to be representatives of this world as we were again. But, the vast majority of humanity is still following the satanic rebellion. And thus, since Satan was removed and they're under the headship of Satan, well, they are not being represented in the heavenly council. They are not representing themselves in the heavenly council. So we have to come under Christ, and he will lift us up and elevate us to sit in heavenly places with him. Thus, we have him as our representative in the heavenly council. But eventually, we need to be able to represent ourselves and come, enjoy I almost want to use the word status, but I don't mean that in the social sense which it carries today, but, to enjoy the place in the heavenly council which all the worlds enjoy. So this is all part and parcel of what this section is discussing, that all the glory of Adam's will be something that we will inherit. So in order to do that, we have to enter into an everlasting covenant with God. This everlasting covenant is described in some detail in our studies on Ezekiel 16. So if anyone wants to check that out, that'll give a fuller understanding of the everlasting covenant. And, it's only through entering into an everlasting covenant with God, and that covenant consists of vowing to have the instructions, the teachings, the truths, which are given to us from our heavenly family, engraved in our hearts, to no longer follow the stubbornness of our own hearts and to walk in sinful paths, but to walk uprightly according to righteousness. And through that means all the glory of Adam can be ours, because guess what? We won't be in the dominion of the devil anymore. We will be in the dominion of Christ. And as I mentioned, he intends to elevate us to be able to have the kingdom and the dominion, and to take that glory of Adam and have the first dominion restored. So I wanted to mention some of those things by way of reminder, in case anyone forgot. So does anyone have any other comments or questions on this sentence?
you answered my question. I was going to ask what was the glories of Adam and Eve before sin. Thank you.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Heavenly Family. All right, well, since no one is mentioning other comments or questions on that sentence, I will read the next sentence again, and we can discuss that. It says, "There shall be no more lies, and all the works of falsehood shall be put to shame." So any comments or questions concerning that?
Well, obviously that's awesome.
Amen. That is awesome. I mean, this sentence, again, it may even be more straightforward than the previous one. You know, it's saying plainly there will be no more lies, and all the works of falsehood will be put to shame. I mean, oh man, what a world that will be, you know, to not have sin and lies. And notice that it shows both of these aspects, ideas and actions. And so that's kind of what we talked about before in terms of morality and truth value. You know, really good and evil in terms of morality, and truth and falsehood in terms of ideas are really describing the same sort of thing. You know, truth and goodness are describing harmony with reality in terms of two different aspects. Truth in terms of the aspect of ideas and statements, goodness in terms of the aspect of actions or behavior. Likewise, falsehood and badness or wickedness are describing a sort of countering to material reality in the two different aspects, again, of, on the one hand, ideas and statements, that's where the word falsehood applies, and on the other hand, within the aspect of actions and behaviors, and that's where words like badness and wickedness apply. And so here you have both aspects. There shall be no more lies, and all the works of falsehood shall be put to shame. Now notice that immoral behavior, false actions, are referred to as the works of falsehood. Well, this whole statement just screams out truth-based morality. That's what it's talking about. It's talking about these two elements, and it ties them together so intricately. And that's the case, of course, throughout this whole section. The element of truth and right behavior on one hand, and falsehood and wrong behavior on the other, are so interwoven that it's quite plain that this system is a truth-based morality. It doesn't say, oh, all the things that God has said are right and right actions on one side, and all the things that God has said are wrong and wrong actions on the other side. No, that's not how it's putting things forward. It's terming things or phrasing things in light of truth and falsehood. Likewise, it is not saying what societies have deemed to be good on one hand and behavior versus what societies have deemed to be bad and bad behavior. No, it's not joining those things together. It's really clearly a truth-based morality system, and it's talking about the end of lies and evil and wickedness, and the way that happens all throughout this is by truth displacing falsehood. Truth just overwhelming it, overcoming it. And so that's the idea set forth here in the community rule. Are there any other comments or questions on that?
Just that, that's just I'm just basically paraphrasing what you just said, but that lies and falsehood, right now they seem honorable. A lot of people are walking in lies and falsehood. They don't realize how just shameful it is, but the truth is just going to put, will expose folly for what it is, and it'll just be so shameful. Once it's so funny as I just go about talking with people that are, stuck in the old paradigm of falsehood, thinking it's truth like I used to. It just seems so ridiculous to me now. It's such a shame, and I know that's even going to happen more and more in my own life, where I'm going to see just the shamefulness of folly and falsehood and lies. And I'm sure there's still some lies I'm holding on to and believing, but my eyes have been opened so much. But there's a day coming when just the truth is just going to totally expose it and just put it to shame. So.
Amen. I really appreciate your comment there. That's highlighting the aspect that it says here at the end of this about, lies and all the works of falsehood really being put to shame. And that is what truth really does to it. And, I know that Truth and I can certainly relate to that experience where, there are things in the past which we considered to be so reasonable, and we really thought that it was so great, and now it's like, oh wow, it's very easy in regard to many things to really see falsehood, and it's in a sense it even puts us to shame because wow, we really fell for that, and
right.
Even like debates between theists and atheists, and seeing the arguments that theists put forward, and just like really like outright promoting the idea of this non-physical God and all of that. And I remember seeing some of those same debates in the past and thinking, oh yeah, that makes so much sense. And now I'm like, oh wow, they are just, these ideas could not possibly be true. And yeah, it's really amazing to be able to view it with fresh eyes and the perspective that this message brings to all things, really. It's just, it definitely causes one to view all things in a very different light. And it's so freeing and so clarifying. Like when I now observe different things, whether it's, just someone explaining their ideas or whether it's a debate and people are explaining, why they believe what they believe and so on. It's just, I can just see so clearly now the basically the folly of these ideas, which is, of course, immensely helpful because then seeing the folly enables us to not partake in it. So, any other comments or questions?
And that's what Sister Wisdom is all about, giving us wisdom and understanding.
Amen. Yeah, this is one of the things about this message that I find most compelling and most amazing. And not only in this message, just even in my own experience, how it's one of the most profound evidences of our Heavenly Family in my mind. Of course, there are others that are equally profound, but it's really incredible to me how, if wisdom was really a fairy tale. If she was really even just a personification, a metaphorical personification of the attribute wisdom, and there was no being named wisdom, and there was no Yahweh and all of that, it just is so ridiculous to think that, someone in asking an imaginary friend to make him her friend, that subsequent to that request, there would be all of these various, basically such a clear outlining of the principles of wisdom and understanding. In other words, when I asked wisdom to make me her friend, after that is when I came to understand all of these various principles about materialism and what it means, and the implications of it in regard to how we go about learning and all of that, all the various principles that we're learning in this message. And it's like, man, I cannot see how any sort of genuine knowledge such as this could possibly come about by talking to an imaginary friend. And so for me, it's just absolutely stunning and remarkable that that this message has come about as it has. And it really does show an amazing divine mind behind it all. So, if there are no other comments on that, we can go on to the next sentence. And what I'll do is I'll just read, from here until the end of column 4, because there's not that much left. And I'll read it in order to get the context and so on, and then we'll go back to the first sentence. So this is what it says. Until now, the spirits of truth and falsehood contend in the minds of men. They walk in wisdom or in folly. Now, there's no and there. It's not and they walk in both wisdom and folly. There's no and there's certainly no both. And so, until now, the spirits of truth and falsehood contend in the minds of men. They walk in wisdom or in folly. According to his portion of truth and righteousness, so does a man hate falsehood. And according to his inheritance in the lot of falsehood, so is he wicked, and so hates truth. For God has established the two spirits in equal measure until the determined end, and until the renewal. And he knows the results of their deeds for all time. He has allotted them to the children of men, that they may know good and evil, and that the lot of all the living may be according to their spirit in the day of their appointed visitation. So, as I'm sure you guys noticed, what I read is mostly the same as Giza Vermesh's translation, but there were some differences for sure. So let's go back to the beginning of that section. Until now, the spirits of truth and falsehood contend in the minds of men. They walk in wisdom or in folly. Any comments or questions?
They're talking about us. It's our hearts that they're struggling in, trying to get us to accept one or the other. are struggling in our heart, trying to save us, or the opposite.
Indeed. So, of course, this is all about our way of thinking. Why? Well, truth is thinking according to material reality. Falsehood is thinking in a way that's contrary to material reality. And so these two principles are very much so working against one another. And yeah, it's really, I guess the statement in itself is quite plain. Of course, it starts by saying until now. In other words, at the time this was written, this was still the case. That the spirits of truth and falsehood contended or struggled in the way of thinking of men or of people. In other words, hey, this is true corporately and also individually, that everyone goes through the experience of encountering both truth and falsehood. And the question is, what will each individual do with these two principles? And, there's been many times that I've seen someone encounter truth, and what do? There's a choice. Will the person accept it, or will they reject it? And I'll just give a brief example. A little while ago, I posted something about the first English Bible ever. Of course, it was the Wycliffe translation. John Wycliffe and his co-laborers put together a translation of the Bible and published it, put it out there for the world. Well, what's interesting is that Bible had different books in it than the books that we are used to. It had the books that we're used to, but it also had additional writings, and they weren't put off in a separate section. It's not like it had a section called Apocrypha. No, intermingled with the other writings that are in the Protestant canon were texts such as the Wisdom of Solomon, the Wisdom of Ben Sirach, Tobit, 1st and 2nd Maccabees, and so on and so forth. And then in the New Testament, there are the 27 New Testament books with which we are familiar, and also the Epistle of Paul to the Laodiceans. So that's an apocryphal or pseudepigraphal text, but there it was in the very first English Bible. And so I simply posted that information, just like, hey, here's a fact of history, without getting into the implications of it and all of that. But I pointed out that some of these texts are less familiar to people, and I noted which ones they were, and I posted the list just as it is in Wycliffe's translation, and I posted a link for people to go and confirm that that's actually what the Wycliffe translation was like. Okay, so that's truth, right? I mean, that's a statement which corresponds to material reality. In fact, you can even go online and view, the reason why I didn't say read is because this is Middle English, which is very difficult for modern English speakers to read. But you can go and you can literally view every page of Wycliffe's Bible, not a modern digitized version of it. You can do that too, but you can even go and see a handwritten original. And, so this is like totally easily verifiable, factual information. We know it was the case because we have copies of Wycliffe's Bible. So this is a statement which certainly corresponds with material reality, and thus is truth. So when someone comes in contact with that, then they are met with an opportunity to either accept that that is, in fact, part of reality, and to incorporate that part of reality into their thinking and to see how it relates to other things and to digest it. And, that's accepting the truth. It's acknowledging what the truth is and actually having it have its impact on our way of thinking in regard to everything. In other words, we need to come to an understanding of the implications of that aspect of reality. Or one could decide that they don't like that part of reality for whatever reason, and I'll mention some possible reasons why one might not like that part of reality, and thus, oppose the making of those statements, even though they are manifestly and evidently true. And, when I posted this recently, unfortunately, some of the response was of that nature. It was accused of being strange fire, even though it is just a verifiable fact of reality. So why would that happen? That someone's just posting information, factual information, and it receives such opposition? Well, the reason why, of course, is because people have preconceived ideas, people have biases, and if a fact, if a bit of reality threatens someone's view, they might just reject that bit of reality or dislike it and not want to hear it and oppose the communication of it and so on. And, it's not that someone thinks it's just simply not true. It's that it threatens a perspective. And notice how this is such a bad way, this is such a biased way to test claims. It's not just saying, hey, let's look at the facts of reality, let's see if what this individual is saying is true. And that would be a coherent and reasonable response. If someone says, hey, here's some factual information, a natural question is, is that actually factual? So you can check it out. And if it is, you can say, oh, thank you, I didn't know that. And then incorporate that into your way of thinking. But an approach which is definitely not in accordance with love for the truth is an approach which says, I'll kind of thresh out this example with Wycliffe's Bible. So someone who accepts the 66-book Protestant canon, and let's say they even are KJV-only advocates or something like that, well, something like that may be a threat. Oh, you're saying that there's a Bible that's different from what I consider to be the Bible. Well, that can't be right. And you talking about it makes it seem like, it's uncertain and all of that as to what exactly the Bible is. So I don't want to hear that. I don't like that. I would prefer to just stick to the Bible that I'm used to. Or if someone shares that information about Wycliffe's Bible and you happen to just be set on the Protestant canon, you may think, this person is promoting these other books, and I don't want to have to investigate these other books. The 66 books of the Protestant Bible are enough. Most people don't even read all of them. It's just too much to do to study these other writings and all of that. Let's, not talk about that. So you might try and close that down. And ultimately, if someone advocates or if someone does something, posts information even, which might seem to advocate something other than the Bible that you have, then it's like there's a rival Bible, and that seems to threaten the authenticity of the Bible, which you may have and claim to be the Holy Bible. Especially, it'd be easy in a sense if it was, for a Protestant, the Catholics, they have another Bible? Yeah, of course, because they're Catholics and they added something to the Bible. It's easy to speak against those who you already are in contention with. But if you bring up something like Wycliffe's Bible, and Wycliffe was a proto-reformer, if you will, and especially if you're coming from an Adventist perspective, and Ellen White spoke so highly of Wycliffe and of his translation of the Bible and so on, well, all of a sudden you can't speak so outright against Wycliffe, but you don't like the fact that his Bible contained these books which you don't accept. So because of those, because of not liking the implications of where that might lead, you tend to reject the facts. Now that's not anything close to a proper investigation. No, we need to learn the facts of reality, whatever they may be, and conform our ideas to match reality, rather than having our ideas and then if someone, confronts us with a part of reality which, has some sort of tension with our ideas, we resist it and censor the individual or block them out of our hearing. That's not going to bring us to any good place. It's along the lines of reality denial. So we need to be people who will accept truth no matter what it is. And that when someone comes to us with claims, let us not go into judging those claims on where we think it might lead. This person is bringing this claim to me. Well, if what they're saying is true, well, that means that I have to change this in my life or that in my life, or that means that I have to change my perspective on this. And if I change my perspective, what will my family think of me? What will my friends think of me? I might become socially isolated. People might think I'm weird. And, if you go with thinking about all of the possible outcomes of accepting a certain proposition and using your like or dislike of those outcomes as your means of judging it, that will not bring you to a knowledge of truth. It's a dishonest method. It's not a proper investigation. It's inherently biased. And there's everything wrong with it. So we need to be a people who will not do that. We need to be a people who, when we hear an idea, regardless of how contrary it may be to our preconceptions, we need to say, hey, wherever this leads, doesn't matter. If it's true, I want to know it, and I want to advocate it, and I want to be able to incorporate it into my thinking and have the rest of my thinking in harmony with this part of reality. So this is, of course, very, very important. Yeah, amen. Any other comments or questions on this line of things?
We're saying we're rich in goods and have need of nothing. When we have that attitude, we made an idol out of the beliefs we've got already.
Indeed, that's exactly what it is, making an idol out of our preconceptions.
And God tells us in Revelation what he thinks about it all. Wretched, miserable, poor, blind, and naked, having need of everything.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, so this sentence here, Until now, the spirits of truth and falsehood contend in the minds of men. Well, that's certainly the case. It was the case when the community rule was written, and it's still the case now. And it says they walk in wisdom or in folly. Okay, so wisdom, of course, is the way of thinking, which I forget exactly how it's put in on the supremacy of reason, but it says something like, which with sound logic prefers, it's defining reason. Reason is the way of thinking, which with sound logic prefers above all else the way of wisdom. So, here, wisdom and folly, of course, fall into those categories of truth and falsehood. Wisdom describes a way of thinking which is in harmony with truth. Folly describes a way of thinking which is out of harmony with truth. So we have this battle going on for our way of thinking, and we will either go with one or the other.
We're letting our emotion, our flesh, do our thinking. What do I think about it? Excuse me, go ahead.
No, that's fine. I was just going to say that lack of wisdom is really what brings about so much damage.
The biggest thing we need to learn is who is wisdom. And quit trusting in everything else besides the spirit of truth and the angel of mercy, as Sister White said.
She is a tree of life. So certainly, wisdom is the answer. Looking at the time and knowing that we have a new moon starting tonight and then we have a new moon meeting tomorrow, I'm not thinking to go further in the text of the community rule tonight. So I just want to see if there are any last comments or questions from anyone in regard to the things that we've been discussing. And if so, great, we'll deal with it within the next 20 minutes or so. And if not, then we'll close off the meeting.
I got one if nobody else does.
Go for it.
Did you say that Jesus and John the Baptist were ahead of this movement at one time? That's why it was so important. I was just getting set up to listen. I think when I heard that, I want to make sure if you said it or I heard it.
Well, it depends on what you mean by this movement. What I was saying is that they were the heads of their respective movements. So John the Baptist was the leader of his movement, and Jesus was the leader of his movement. And then after that, James became the leader of the Jesus movement, the Nazarenes, and then after that, Paul became the leader of the Nazarene movement.
Well, the Nazarene movement was updated. In other words, it wasn't the movement that began with the teacher of righteousness. I think maybe that's what threw me off. John the Baptist was never the leader of that movement.
Right. So it's kind of like look at the history of Adventism. Ellen White, beginning in late 1844, either that or January 1st, 1845, began to have visions, and she became the leader of the Seventh-day Adventist movement. And then down the road, you have Victor Hoddeth, and he became leader of the Davidian Seventh-day Adventist movement, but the vast majority of Seventh-day Adventists never followed his teachings or considered him their leader. And so it's the same thing, with John the Baptist. He was the leader of his movement, but most of those who claimed to follow the teacher of righteousness did not necessarily follow John the Baptist. Although, we can't actually give numbers. We know that he was quite a popular teacher. He held a lot of sway, so it could be that a lot of them did, but I don't think that there's any sort of evidence that he was actually like the recognized leader of the movement, because the headquarters was at Qumran, and so far as we know, there's nothing that would tie John the Baptist to running his ministry from the Qumran settlement and being the leader of the movement. I don't believe there's any evidence for something like that. So he was never like the Essene leader or anything like that. It seems to be that he was either kicked out of the group or left the group himself and started teaching, and then there were large crowds which surrounded him. And then even the Jesus movement, in a sense, it was the John movement, but at the same time different. He was the successor. It's very, very much so like what it is in the branch. The branch movement is actually the Davidian movement, although that isn't recognized by non-branch Davidians, as in Davidians who are not branch Davidians. And same thing with the Nazarene movement. The Nazarene movement really was the John the Baptist movement, even though in the days of John the Baptist, before Jesus, they weren't called the Nazarenes. But it was really like Jesus became the leader of that movement. He was the successor of John, but that wasn't recognized by those followers of John who did not follow Jesus. And so it's the same sort of situation. So are there any other comments or questions?
I like that quote by Sister White where she says, God uses one man to take a movement as far as he's capable, then he'll choose another man to take it farther, and oftentimes the other man or his group don't want to relinquish their position and let God's new man take over and finish the work further.
Yes, she does describe that quite clearly in at least a couple places. Yeah, very important to realize, for sure. So if there are no other comments or questions, would someone like to thank our Heavenly Family?
I will. Heavenly Family, we thank you so much for this beautiful Sabbath day and this oncoming new moon. We look forward to the new light that you have for us. And I pray your hand of blessing upon each one of us. I pray for selflessness among the people of our group, and that we would just lift up the truth and follow it and see the shame in folly and lies and falsehood. And please help expose that so that we can see it with our own eyes, the folly, basically. And we love you very much, and thank you, and please put a hedge of protection around each one of us. In the name of the branch, he and she, Hashem Shemak Huahi. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. All right, love you all very much. Bye, Latov.
Thank you.
Happy new moon.